Hello, we are here at the Free Seas One Opportunity Conference and I have with me Rebecca Schönenbach from Germany. She is an expert on extremism and she is a chairwoman of Veto for the Rechtsstaat, German think tank. And we would like and I would like to talk about what we are experiencing now from the perspective of Germany, because we are experiencing kind of the tectonic, even teutonic shift in German policy concerning Russia and its dependence on energy sources, but also about looking for new energetical support. And my question is if because in Poland we are like thinking if that is new, it's a new change that it will be constant, or that's the change that is kind of temporary and after the war will be somehow resolved or the conflict will diminish and we will be back in the business again, yes, the old. How that looks, that change from the perspective in Germany?
Well, I think the issue of energy dependency from the German perspective is going to stick, because it struck Germany hard that the dependency does not allow for any freedom in negotiations. So I think that the Ministry of the Economy, Robert Habeck, did a lot during the past 6 to 8 weeks to reduce this energy dependency. Of course, with the energy policy in Germany shutting down nuclear plants, that's quite difficult, and it's nothing to do with the war, it's to do with the former energy policy. But I think he really aims to reduce the dependency on Russia. But on the overall perspective concerning trade, I don't think it's a permanent change, especially because in the coalition there are quite some strong forces who vote for dealing with Russia and accepting them back and accepting negotiations with Russia. So they're not on the same page in every aspect of the policy towards Russia. So
you are saying that they want to reduce dependency but still engage in the international trade and in and cooperation with Russia?
This would be my prediction.
Okay. And how this initiative of Minister Habeck was successful in finding other resources, because I heard him met with Qatar and probably he also was, I don't know, but there were some talks with Algeria also. And is it somehow successful to find the alternatives?
Yes, he substituted already a third. That was easier to substitute. I mean, it's different parts of the energy concept. Some are easier to substitute, some are not. But he managed to, the more easier thing, to deal with German companies, and they very quickly changed the contracts, and they will end some of the contracts they already still have at the end of the year. So that changed. Another third he's working on now, and he said it's feasible to do that within the next weeks, to change that, and there's one third left which is dependent on Russian energy and which is really difficult to change, but at least he says it's possible.
So the promise of German government that it can go into the blocking, into the let's say, into the blocking Russian energy imports since the next year, it will be kept?
Difficult to say, but I would say that at least the Green Party would vote for blocking it permanently. The SPD is a different matter. There are some who would vote for it, others who oppose the cutting of energy with Russia, and they're still buying Russian gas. And even though they said they're not going to let it happen, that the deal is to pay in rubles, they still do, and so on. So they always walk back and forth, and I'm not sure that once some kind of agreement is reached with Russia, that they would still argue it's necessary to reduce the energy supply. But I think the Green Party would vote for really stopping the energy supply from Russia, and I hope that they will succeed in putting that point through.
Oh. And yet, when the world is looking for, not only Germany, but the whole world, for alternatives, we are seeing that negotiation with Iran on the coming back to JCPOA agreement are speeding up, and some people say that we are so close to having the deal, but you are critical, as we talked before, that you are critical about the German positions, that they are making the same mistake that they did with Russia. Could you elaborate more on that?
Well, this is why I'm not too optimistic at the moment, because even the Green Party, with the foreign ministers from the Green Party and the economy minister, do not utter any change in the policy towards Iran. And Russia already said, the Russian negotiator already said that they plan to evade sanctions, possible sanctions through Iran. This is also why they push for negotiations with the Iranian regime, although there's no real reason to continue the negotiations because the Iranian regime has breached every contract so far, and it strengthened them. I mean, if we look back the last 7-8 years, we had a refugee crisis because of the meddling of the Iranian regime, not only, but in huge part in Syria. So they breached the negotiations dealt with the JCPOA. So there's no real reason they instate a dictatorship. At the moment, we have protesters in Iran. Nobody's talking about them, but they protest against the Iranian regime again, although they're being imprisoned and tortured.
And probably about food shortages.
Food shortages, all sorts, water shortages, electricity shortages, all these things. And still, Germany does negotiate with the Iranian regime, although that turned out to be the wrong path with Russia, because it enables dictatorships instead of stopping them. There was this thought in 2015 that if we negotiate, they would come our way, they would reform themselves. That has proven wrong. They even went the other way. So I think it's a mistake, but I don't see a change in the German policy so far.
But does the German has any alternative other? Because, well, the majority of carbon resources are in hands of authoritarian regimes, mostly.
Well, I don't think that's true, especially looking at the US. They are the biggest exporter of gas, yeah. And there's also, of course, there would have been resources even in Germany.
Thinking in terms of Middle East, yeah, always, yeah.
Well, you can negotiate with the Qataris, but then you have to negotiate strong and to tell them that they have to stop the funding of extremism. They have to stop Al Jazeera. That would be my requirement, because we have seen with Russia the propaganda war is part of the hybrid war against democracies, and you have to address that. You cannot negotiate on a level ignoring the threat to democracies. But I don't think it's possible with the Iranian regime, because they have proven time and again that they're not going to abide by contracts. So they will break them anyway, and they can't give us anything. They're not, of course, oil, yes, but they're not really the biggest supplier and the only supplier, so that is not a necessity. It's more, the negotiations are more motivated by the thought that if you negotiate, the danger will reduce, and it's the opposite. So I think it's a dangerous thing to continue the negotiations, because it enables them, it strengthens them towards their own population, it legitimizes the regime, and it allows them to hold on to power. And even now the US is proposing to lift some of the sanctions, especially of the Revolutionary Guard, which is not only a military organization, but it's also the biggest economic force within Iran. So to strengthen them is very, very dangerous.
But if you were to compare Russia and Iran, for me Russia seems a bigger threat, and it is close more to our borders, and Iran, I don't think, or maybe you disagree, or maybe you have the other perspective, that Iran is not a problem for our internal security, in example.
It is. I mean, we have now several court cases against Iranian agents. We have a court case in France and Belgium because they planned an attack on the Iranian opposition. There's a court case in Sweden. We had Iranian agents supervising German politicians and planning attacks against them. So there is a real danger. We had attacks in Bulgaria. So it is a terrorism threat. It's not only a threat in terms of the Middle East, the meddling in the Middle East, where they cause war and then subsequent force people to flee, but it's also an internal threat to internal security on the level of terrorist attacks and on the level of propaganda, because they're very strong in Germany, investing in youth organizations, investing in doing dawah, so convincing people to convert, and also to separate the youth from the majority of society. So Khamenei issued 2 letters to the youth in the West asking them to disintegrate, not to integrate, not to assimilate, and he explicitly targets the youth in the West to convince them to stay away from integrating into democracies.
So these are other than Russian, but also operation of influence in...
It is an information war, and it is a war on different levels. And the Russian aims were different, but they also targeted the democratic system, with Russia Today, for example, emanating then some false stories. But it's a different threat level, and of course Russia was more successful, more powerful on the propaganda level, and of course we see now the results, but they also work together very well. Not only in the Middle East, they teamed up in Syria, but they also team up on international levels of negotiations, and also on the lobbyist, on the policy lobbying, they team up and try to convince.
What is the option for the Germany and for the West, yes, in this negotiation on JCPOA? Because some say that, okay, this Trump withdrawing from JCPOA and that this idea of maximum pressure on Iran doesn't help in preventing Iran from constructing nuclear weapon, and Iran is much more closer than it was a few years ago.
Well, it's closer because the Europeans didn't play along. They even tried to circumvent the sanctions, and the Israelis said it was effective. It stopped them, at least it slowed them down. You can't stop them totally, but you can slow them down. And it's all about slowing them down as much as you can, because of course they try to pursue their goals, and this is what they state. They really mean it. They mean to destroy Israel. They mean to destroy the West in some stages. Of course, Israel is their primary target, but still. And it worked. I mean, it worked to sanction them, it slowed them down, and if the Europeans hadn't tried to circumvent the sanctions and help them with Instex, which was also a German initiative to provide funds, it would have stopped them effectively. As you can see now with Russia, sanctions work. And if you don't put pressure on them, it's the same with Russia, you enable aggressors.
So what do you think in the longer run, Germany, what kind of options in energetic field it has, yes? Because we see certain deals, certain negotiation to resupply, to change the sources of gas, but a lot of people are, especially in Poland, critical that Germany is closing their nuclear plants.
I think it would be the best option would be not to close them down, and then to substitute slowly the oil. Oil is easier to substitute, it's nearly there, and then to substitute the gas supplies and think about alternatives, which of course is one of the goals of the Green Party, and to invest in new technologies.
But the Green Party is not in favor of nuclear plants.
No, this is why they are shut down. They're very much in favor of shutting them down, and I think that is a huge mistake. But the reasonable approach is to substitute energy by new technologies like water power plants and so on. Yeah, so this might work. I'm not an engineer, so I don't know enough about that subject, but I think there is a good push in terms of investing in new technology, and that is a good goal. But on the short and middle term, we should keep the power plants running to avoid disaster.
Okay, thank you very much for having you here, and we can enjoy now the conference.
Thank you for the invitation.